Welcome to today's podcast of Everyone Has the Freedom to Choose. This is Deb King. Join us for today's cornerstone conversation. Whose voice? Not in wind or the storm, but in the still, small voice. It has been a crazy, busy few weeks. Voices from all directions clamoring for my attention, and yet only so much time to give attention to any of them. For me, at times, all this commotion leaves me with a deer in the headlights kind of response. Whew. There are voices calling here and there, listen to me. Whether natural disasters, political, social, the stock market, business, family, friends, church, neighbors, school, and the list seems endless. How easy to get caught up in the moment of emotions. In the process, often our heart stability can get shaken. To whom are we listening, engaging, or giving our mental real estate? How does God cut through the clutter? Or does he? It's not about how loud God can speak to us. It's not about his voice being raised above all that's swirling around. He will never yell and demand our attention. That's not his character. So how do we navigate all those voices and demands that scream in our ears? How do we decipher the roadmap we're to traverse with clarity? Time is fleeting. God knows our beginning straight through to our end. This we all know, that to every human being we are all given the same number of hours in each day. We know that our days are numbered, as it is said in Job 14:5, Psalm 39:4, and Psalm 139:16. We are told that not only are our days numbered, but the author is asking God to show us our life's end, the number of our days, and how fleeting our life is. Each of us has a God-given purpose for our lives, a purpose we are specially and intentionally created to fulfill. Will we fulfill all we were created for? That is up to us. The voice we listen to determines if and how we fulfill that purpose. God will not demand our attention. He does not scream or even yell for us to see him. So how do we hear his voice? Where do we see his guidance? How can we cut through the clutter to hear his voice? Elijah understood our plight. The book of 2 Kings records, "And he said, 'Go out and stand on the mount before the Lord.' And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. And Elijah heard it. He wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him and said, 'What are you doing here, Elijah?'" 1 Kings 19, verses 11 to 13, the English Standard Version. Elijah was petrified and scared to death because his life had been threatened by Jezebel, King Ahab's wife. This wasn't a threat that was to be taken lightly. Elijah had forgotten the miracle God had just performed. Elijah was listening to the voices that were screaming and not the voice he knew so well. The loud voices weren't just the people, but the voices in his mind as well. Oh, how I can relate to Elijah some days. The voices clamoring to gain access to our mind some days is hard to overcome. But Elijah went to God's mountain to gain clarity, to get God's perspective on his plight. He went to the source he knew would be true. He went to God. Elijah found that God wasn't in the wind, earthquake, or fire, but the whisper of God. He had to quiet his mind and heart enough to hear the whisper of God. This is a key for us as well. We need to go to the source that we can trust to gain direction and perspective for the day, the circumstance, the challenge or threat, the high places and the low. When we stop, get quiet, and listen for God, even in the midst of the storm, He will be found. He will hear us and respond, even in that still, small, quiet voice. He will answer us. We may not like the answer, but God assures us that He will be with us in the midst of it all. When we search for God, our eyes and ears are no longer on the problem, but the one with the solution. He helps us to gain His perspective in all circumstances. Years ago, I had a spiritual mentor named Inez. She was a treasured gift from God. When I would get all out of sorts, I would go to her house. She would have me sit on this stool and allow me to spew all my emotions, fears, and anger. After a bit of time, she would hand me a piece of cake she had just baked. This was her way of saying, "You've said enough. Now it's time to listen." She said, "That's your perspective. Now let's hear God's." Inez taught me how to see things from God's perspective, not mine. She taught me how to see the other person's heart through God's eyes. She taught me how to pray and hear God's voice in the midst of my emotions and the storm. She taught me how to be quiet in the heart of my prayers and listen for God's still small voice. Inez was a prayer warrior. She knew that in her seeking God, she would find wisdom, strength, and hope for every day, every circumstance, every mountaintop and valley. She taught me how to seek God's face, touch His heart, and hear His words for me. I am blessed. Inez was an incredible gift to my family and me. Today, can you stop for a moment and ask God to help you hear His whispers? Thanks for listening and being a part of our conversation. You are welcome to pass it on. You can find us at www.debaking.com.